So WWDC is right around the corner, and in addition to Apple's announcement of their switch to ARM processors going forward, we're also expecting to see, finally, for the first time in 8 years, a new iMac. And that's great, and we're going to talk about what that entails in today's video. But what I'm really curious about is, what does that mean for the iMac Pro? This is a 2009 iMac. It's 11 years old. This is an old computer, you might say. And yet, it looks quite familiar. In fact, from the front, it looks exactly the same as the current iMac. And that's a problem, because you see, I don't have anything against the iMac design, but you can't deny that it's a little bit dated. Now, for me personally, the only thing that I really dislike, like actively do not like about the aesthetics of the current iMac are these fat-ass bezels. You could sink an oil tanker in these bezels. They're gigantic and they need to go. Now, fortunately for us, it seems like after a long 8-year wait, we're finally going to get a new design on the iMac. Now, I know that already there are going to be people out there saying, who cares? I think my iMac looks fine. I really don't care about bezels at all. Why does this matter? I'll tell you. So one of the things that's going to be different about this year's iMac, not just from an aesthetic perspective, but from an architecture perspective, is the internal design, which is also something that hasn't changed in 8 years on the standard iMac. Now, this right here is a late 2013 27-inch iMac, and it has a Core i7-4770, which is a decent performing chip, but it's not particularly powerful. This computer also has GTX 780M graphics, which again are pretty good. Certainly were very good at the time, but aren't particularly outstanding anymore. Now, you may be wondering, where am I going with this? Well, the main point is, right now, you can get an iMac that looks identical to this with a Core i9 and Vega 48 graphics, significantly better. However, the board layout and the cooling design are exactly the same. Modern processors have increased core counts, we've got better graphics. This uses mobile graphics, whereas right now, the Vega 48 is not a mobile GPU, so why the heck are we still using the exact same heatsink? One fan. Not to mention the fact that this whole iMac design is built around mechanical drives, because back in 2012, mechanical drives were pretty much the norm. And the sad reality is, in 2019, with that version of the iMac, the most recent one as of this filming, that was still the norm. You still have to pay extra on a $2,300 iMac to get a solid-state drive. So from both an external and an internal perspective, the iMac is in dire need of an upgrade. And that's why I'm really excited about this year's 2020 iMac redesign, which we won't have to wait very long for. So the rumor mill is abuzz with news of an upcoming 2020 iMac redesign. Now, the big highlights of this are that we are going to be getting what has been described as an iPad Pro-like design. So take an iPad Pro, make it big, put it on a stand. That's kind of what we're being told it's going to look like. Kind of a cross between an iPad Pro and a Pro Display XDR. Personally, I'm a fan. I like that idea. That's a good idea. If that report is to be believed, then we can also say goodbye to the iconic chin that has been on the iMac since, well, I guess since the white plastic G5 iMac. So yeah, that's pretty crazy. Now, in keeping with this iPad Pro-like design, we can also expect that the two different sizes of iMac are going to receive a similar treatment as the two different sizes of iPad Pro did back in 2018. Now, basically what that entailed was the smaller 10.5-inch iPad Pro kept the exact same form factor, and the screen was enlarged to slim down the bezels, whereas the larger model with the 12.9-inch screen kept the same screen size and shrunk the form factor to fit it. Now, personally, I see that being the most likely scenario for the iMac. The 21.5-inch iMac will probably keep the same size, and then the screen will get bigger, and then the 27-inch is probably going to stay a 27-inch, and then we'll just shrink the body down to fit that screen. And that would fall in line with leaks that came out a couple of months ago that were talking about a 23-inch iMac, which would be a new size for us, and didn't really mention the larger iMac. So some people at the time thought, well, why would they upgrade the 23-inch? Why would they make that model and then not touch the larger one? I think that was basically just lost in translation there. The 27 is getting updated too, but because it's not a new model, it didn't get reported on as much. So that's what we're looking at from a design perspective, but internally we can also expect improved cooling. Apparently it's going to have dual cooling fans, which is going to be good, especially if we're going to be having high-end 10th gen Intel chips, 6, 8, 10 cores, as well as Navi GPUs. Now that is going to be quite interesting. I think we can make some pretty decent predictions as to what graphics we can expect in this year's iMac. Now in the 23-inch model, I think it's almost a shoo-in that it's going to have the same graphics as the 16-inch MacBook Pro. I mentioned this in a recent video, so I won't go into too much detail, but basically the smaller iMac for the last couple of years has basically just pulled the graphics straight from the MacBook Pro. So right now it has a 555 and 560X graphics. I think it would make sense that we'll see 5300M and 5500M, and they'll probably retain those same price brackets of the current smaller iMac. So I think that's going to be a really compelling value, especially if you don't have to pay extra to get solid state storage. Now, as far as the larger iMac, it is still unknown what we're going to see, because right now they have like 575, 580X, and then the Vega 48 graphics. It's a little bit confusing, but from what I would understand, I think we're probably going to get something like Radeon Pro 5600 and Radeon Pro 5700 graphics. Sort of similar to the way the Mac Pro has a Radeon Pro SKU of the 5700 XT in it. I think that's probably going to happen on the 27-inch iMac, which is going to definitely be a major upgrade over the Vega 48, and even over some of the graphics options that you'd find in an iMac Pro. Now, as far as CPUs, we're probably going to get 10th gen Intel chips that'll be, i3s. A quad-core i3 will probably stick around on the base model 4K iMac. It's unfortunate, but that's probably what's going to happen, and then we'll work our way up to a 10-core i9 on the 27-inch iMac. Now, this is where things start to get concerning for me, because I'm a huge fan of the iMac Pro. My model here, which I got what I think was a pretty decent deal back in, December? Yeah, I got this thing back in December. 18 cores, 128 gigabytes of RAM, 2 terabyte SSD, and the Vega 64 graphics. It's a very, very solid machine. And the thing that's a little bit concerning to me is I don't know what Apple is planning on doing with the iMac Pro. Now, as we know, the iMac Pro was created as a stopgap. Basically, in 2017, Apple acknowledged that the trash can Mac Pro was not good enough, and they said that they were going to be working on one that was much better. But in the meantime, they announced the iMac Pro to give us some modern processors and some actual powerful hardware, and basically just recycled the existing iMac design into this. Now, I think the iMac Pro, despite the fact that it was kind of a stopgap and kind of was cobbled together from bits and pieces they already had, I think the iMac Pro is a really, really solid product. So it does worry me that the iMac Pro might end up getting neglected here. The current Core i9 9900K equipped iMac already makes you question the base $5,000 iMac Pro. It's sort of a questionable value at that price point. But for me at least, the higher end ones with the 18 core processors don't have a ton of competition, especially considering I paid $5,500 for this machine, so you can't really get into a Mac Pro for that money, and you can't really upgrade an iMac to get this sort of performance. So it's definitely filling an important gap, at least for me and a lot of people I know that use this type of computer. And if that wasn't confusing enough, there's another rumor from back in like March, I think, that really confuses me. Basically, they had said, this was sort of when the mini LED rumors were kicking into high gear. They said, you know, 16-inch MacBook Pro, an iPad Pro, stuff like that with mini LED. But there was also a rumor of an iMac Pro with a mini LED display. And gosh darn it, if that doesn't both discourage me and give me false hope. On the one hand, they seem to think that the iMac Pro wouldn't get updated until 2021. Some people were even saying the later half of 2021, which would be quite a while from now. And then on the other hand, there's the fact that now I'm wondering, are we gonna get like a 32-inch iMac Pro? Because, ooh, I want that. I've been saying this for a while, but a 32-inch iMac Pro would be the best thing ever. Literally the best thing ever. I would pay any amount of money for that computer. Now, we're talking about the immediate updates, the 2020 iMac, and what that's going to mean for the 2020 or 2021 iMac Pro. But something that you're also probably curious about is this whole business about switching to ARM processors. What is that going to mean for not just the iMac, but the Mac in general? In 2006, Apple systematically, within the year, replaced every PowerPC Mac with an Intel Mac. They introduced new models. That's where the MacBook came from. It was literally introduced. It replaced Power Mac, and it marked the switch to Intel. The Mac Mini got replaced. The Mac Pro got replaced. The iMac. They switched to everything in a year. I personally don't see that happening here. So what I think is going to happen, both based on my predictions and from insider information that I've heard, the ARM switch is going to be somewhat gradual. Basically, the first ARM MacBook is going to be sort of like a 12-inch Retina MacBook, a thin and light, ultra-portable laptop. Sort of like an iPad Pro, but not pretending to be a laptop, it just will be. And obviously it'll run Mac OS. And that's where people kind of jump to conclusions. They kind of start saying, oh, well, Apple's not going to update the 16-inch MacBook Pro or the iMac soon because they're waiting for ARM. That's not going to happen. The way I see it, ARM isn't going to make its way to a high-end Pro notebook, let alone a desktop, for at least 2 or 3 more years. Apple's processors are ridiculously powerful. The iPad Pro, the current generation iPhones, they're all crazy, crazy fast. But Apple is still working on scaling that technology up. Because obviously right now you can take an A13 and you can compare that to some quad-core Intel chips pretty easily. But when we're talking about a 10-core i9, let alone a 28-core Xeon in a Mac Pro, there's a lot of work that remains to be done to get ARM processors up to that level. So the initial step is, let's get ARM in a Mac, get Mac OS on it, and start to get developers on board. Because you got to remember that there's going to be a very awkward period of time where we are sort of in transition and people are, they have to make their apps work on Mac OS running on ARM architecture. That's just going to have to happen. Now, people are going to kick and scream. They're going to say, oh, why are you doing this? It's making the experience worse. But that's what Apple does. When they make a decision, they commit to it. They dumped the floppy disk on the original iMac and people freaked out. They dumped the CD drive with the original MacBook Air and then on the Retina MacBook Pro, and people were like, what are you doing? They dumped all the ports and went for USB-C Thunderbolt 3 only in 2015 and 2016, and people were like, what are you doing? There's still people that are adjusting to that. Personally, I don't think it's that big a deal, and it certainly doesn't get covered as much as it did back in 2016, but Apple repeatedly makes these decisions that are designed, you could argue, to inconvenience people, but certainly the way they see it, to push technology forward and basically strong-arm innovation the way they want it to go. And then there's the fact that Apple loves really tight integration and they can tune their CPUs to accomplish the things they want to work on. Apple really, really, really wants to work on, neural engine, machine learning, augmented reality. All of that is stuff that they could really tailor their CPUs towards and would allow you to have some really interesting applications that we can't even think of right now because that product just doesn't exist. So to all the people out there that are freaking out that their Macs aren't going to be supported and it's going to switch to ARM and they're not going to have any apps that work, settle down. It's not going to be an overnight shift. It's not going to be 2006 Apple shifting to Intel. Now, for you guys that are subscribed and are still watching at this point in the video, I'm going to be doing a live stream covering the keynote at this year's WWDC. So make sure you're subscribed and follow me on Twitter at Luke Miani to find updates for that. We're going to watch the keynote live, get some live reactions. It's going to be a lot of fun. And as usual, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out my subreddit, which is linked in the description below. And with that, I'll see you all in the next video.